As we gather this morning, our hearts are heavy as our Twin Cities continue to suffer the demonic and satanic evil of this regime. And so I think it's important for us to take a moment of silence to honor the souls of Renee Good and Alex Pretty and all those who are being murdered, abducted, and terrorized by this regime. We'll take 3 deep breaths to center ourselves. We will take a full minute of silence to honor those whose lives have been lost. And then I will offer the collect from the prayer book for those who suffer for the sake of conscience. So let us take 3 deep breaths together. You may close your eyes if that is comfortable. On the first breath, we remember that we are made in the image of God who is love. On the second breath, we remember that we are loved, healed, and redeemed by God's love incarnate in Jesus Christ. On the third breath, we remember that we are surrounded, strengthened, and sustained by God, the Holy Spirit. Amen. And now let us take a full minute of silence to honor the souls of those who have been killed by this regime. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. O God, our Father, whose Son forgave his enemies while he was suffering shame and death, strengthen those who suffer for the sake of conscience, that they, when they are accused, save them from speaking in hate. When they are rejected, save them from bitterness. When they are imprisoned, save them from despair. And to us, your servants, give grace to respect their witness and to discern the truth, that our society may be cleansed and strengthened. This we ask for the sake of Jesus Christ, our merciful and righteous judge. Amen.
Amen. All right. Well, oh, we don't have Brad on the screen. I don't know how to make Brad show up as well as the PowerPoint.
Does he want to speak first and then start? Is he sharing the screen?
No, I'm sharing it.
Okay. I think go to view. Maybe go side by side.
It's still showing them.
Well, and I can do it without the PowerPoint too. That's fine. If it's easier.
Just 1 second. Let me see if I share this again.
Side by side. Then try the small and
Jan, you look very warm over there.
I think you have to like stop the share.
We all need a little comfort blanket.
You stop the share.
Mhm.
Have you introduced Brad?
Not yet.
Okay.
Doesn't look like it's shared within Zoom. Looks like it's just up. That's the regular PowerPoint.
Try this one.
I know how it all needs to. We stay so it's like I just want to keep pushing buttons after a while.
I think let's just hear him
Okay.
without seeing him,
Okay.
and then they can see a slide as he goes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, sorry for the technical difficulties. But today we have Brad Mahal. He has worked in a number of different positions in the recovery field, including has been a chaplain at Union Gospel Mission and has been a director at a recovery program up in St. Cloud. And is a personal friend of mine. So I invited him to come speak today with our topic. And Brad, I have the PowerPoint up. I can't get you on the screen
Okay.
for some reason.
Yeah, that's
So,
okay.
but
Okay,
you
you can
can
go ahead.
talk and I can
Okay.
move the slides when you want me to.
Okay. Can you go to the next one? We'll just start with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, my name is Brad Mahal. When I was asked to give the talk, I have a number of thoughts. This has largely been all of my life for the last 13 years. And so I titled the first slide here, Journey, Not a Destination. There's a lot of things I could have probably said about spirituality and fellowship, and I just chose a couple few that I've found helpful and kind of how it explains my story and how spirituality and recovery is developed in my life. Um, I always used to think of a story. I used to get 3-month sobriety medallions, and I'd go up and give a talk about what I've learned about spirituality recovery at that point in my life. And I kind of wish I had videos of each one of those along the way of how my thoughts have changed about spirituality and recovery and how it's a continual growing process. So we'll do a brief little introduction. The two main points I want to talk about are stories and fellowship and how those interact with each other to what I would say form spirituality and recovery in people's lives. And then I'll share a couple prayers with you that have been impactful for me. And if there's time, questions at the end. So you can go to the next slide, please. So just to start, whenever I come to a topic, I like to think what I already think I know about it and get a starting point. And so This is who I am. I've been in recovery since 2013. I was a drug addict and alcoholic for 10 years prior to that. I was raised in the Christian faith, so I grew up Catholic. Since becoming sober, I've been in Baptist churches, Episcopal churches, Christian Missionary Alliance. I've been in Catholic churches again. I've been in a lot of different churches. I worked at a nonprofit that is rather broad. You know, it uses target theology. My point in saying that is I've just kind of been across the board with theological traditions. And then I've worked in social services, mental health, housing programs, addiction recovery. My education is in psychology and in ministry, and I'm currently in a master's program studying the Bible that I'll finish this year. So the next slide, if you look at that, this is just to trigger that in you. What do you bring to the table when I say spirituality and recovery? What do you think of? If anyone wants to share, I would encourage it. It's a little hard to do on Zoom, but what comes to your mind when you think of spirituality and recovery? Just, is it like a treatment program, a personal friend, anything like that? That can all trigger ideas about what we think spirituality and recovery is.
I'd say it's a healing journey.
Healing journey?
Yes.
Okay.
I think of, I mean, when you say spirituality and recovery, I think of AA immediately, because I have friends who have been in AA and have talked to me a little bit about it. Yeah.
Okay.
I guess I would add that it's a healing journey, and I would say it's my healing journey. I would own
Okay.
that.
Okay. All right. We can go on to the next slide now. But again, that's just something I like to start with any topic, is thinking what we already know about it, what we think about it. And I try and do that for myself. So the way I'm going to try and explain this, so there's two parts of stories, surrender and action, that I'll discuss through my own story. And it largely works in tandem with fellowship. It's not necessarily linear. So a lot of these ideas that I've developed or thought about have come as I've looked back, heard other people's stories, heard how they've dealt with problems. And it's kind of this ebb and flow between evaluating my story, what I'm doing in life, and hearing from other people. And it works back and forth. So I briefly shared I had grown up in a Catholic faith, and my mom worked at a church. At some point, I was probably pretty resentful towards the church and faith. And at the age of 15, I began using drugs and alcohol for the next 11 years, roughly. And I was still kind of around the church because my mom worked there. I grew up in a very small town. It was 5,000 people. So my name was known, and not for necessarily good things. And so there's various points in my story that I can look back on now after hearing other people's stories and kind of see as a point where there was a choice that I made, an action, various factors included, but that could have been different. And I use those more as motivation today. So, for example, at the age of 19 or so, it was the time when I was first introduced to the Christ Recovery Center. I had heard about it by another person sharing his story in rural Minnesota, and my mom being in the crowd. My mom heard the story. She had a son that was addicted to drugs and alcohol, and I'd just gotten arrested for, I think, my second DWI, and convinced me to go check out this program up in the Twin Cities at the Union Gospel Mission. I went in there. I talked to the director of the program, and he kind of gave me some stern words. He gave me his story. Could kind of tell that I was not really ready to do what he wanted me to do, to come into the program. And I had lied through a couple Rule 25s to get out of going to inpatient treatment at this time. And so ended up there, and he kind of said, come back next time. See when it gets a little bit worse. If you want to do something about it, we're here. And that's kind of the beauty of AA as well, is it's more of an attraction rather than promotion. If you want what we have, this is what we've done, and this is how you can get it. Come along that journey. And so that point stands out in my mind as a point where I wasn't quite at a bottom, but I was ready to at least hear someone else's opinion. And that stuck with me. What he said to me that day stayed with me as I continued to use drugs and alcohol. Fast forward, I get to 26 and my life has just become out of control. Ended up overdosing in 2012, went into treatment for 6 months. And then I left treatment and ended up relapsing, ended up back in that same treatment program again in 2013. Just very broken. And kind of the point that I make about surrender, what I think about surrender, is that the story that I had been living up to that point in my life had led to this disastrous result where I was mentally hopeless. I was suicidal in terms of my behavior, mental health, my physical health. I had overdosed. It just wasn't looking good. And I woke up in Chippewa County Jail. That's out in Montevideo, Minnesota. And I was happy to be in jail. That was a real turning point, that my story wasn't what it was supposed to be. And I can kind of remember that, of just that relief that I didn't have to fight anymore, and I could just stay in jail, and I was okay with that. But also at the same time, I knew there was something more. And so you can go to the next slide now. And so these are a couple ideas that I've come to with that point of surrender. And it's happened since I've been sober. It's mainly when I come to an end of what I think I need to have in my life. This quote on top is from Jim Carrey. It says, "I wish that everyone could get rich and famous and everything they ever dreamed of, so they know that's not the answer." Sometimes in my life, I've gotten very stuck on an idea of what I need to have in order for me to be sober. And at the very same time, that thing that's lacking becomes a blessing. Addiction is kind of that way. That point of surrender that I hit, though not good at the time, and I wouldn't want to go back to it, has now served as an important reminder as I go forward in my life when things don't go the way I hope they go. And so then that passage below is Luke 18, and it's that position of the person crying out for mercy versus I've got the answer and I'm still forging my own way. And I'm going to do that at the expense of myself and others. And so those two ideas of surrender stand out. But the important thing is, I think surrender is kind of at least in my mind, a bad idea. You don't want to give up control. But at the same time, it's that point of action. So we can go to the next slide. And that's really what about this story, is this kind of paradoxical life of in surrender, there's power. In defeat, victory. Those type of ideas and have come out of my story. In that point of breaking in the Chippewa County Jail served as a taking off point for recovery. And it wasn't, again, just that simple of it happened then and I was all better. It took time. And there's an important passage that has come to mean a lot to me. It's in John 7. We can go to the next slide. And it's this idea, it's in 7:17 is the verse I want to highlight, but it's, if anyone is willing to do his will, and he will know about the teaching, whether it's of God or am I speaking from myself. And so the way I came to this passage, I was doing some research on the relationship between AA and Christianity and kind of the origins for a presentation I gave in Omaha at a conference one time. And I came upon this passage as a motivation for why they use higher power versus God in the big book. It's this idea of you don't need to have all the right answers. At this point in this passage, they're questioning who Jesus is in his teaching. Is he really who he says he is? And he answers them, it's not of my own, but him who sent me. If anyone's willing to do it, they'll come to know that it's right, that it's the will of God. And so that point of surrender is that taking off points of which required action. And that's kind of the 12 steps work that way. There's these surrender steps, and then it leads into this action of not having the answer. And I don't, my second time at treatment, I was pretty, let's say, mad at God, mad at religion, didn't really want much to do that with that. And I was towards service work and AA and more volunteering and not really concerned about what I thought about God. But over time, as I started to go out and volunteer and do inventory and see different results and have different emotions and things not go my way, and then come back and try and figure out what am I supposed to do with this, things started to change. And the story of the Bible is how I've come to describe it: the creation, fall, redemption, new heaven and new earth kind of our overarching narrative that produces themes are really relevant in my life, and they've come to prove to be true. And it helps me see the world in a different way. We can go to the next slide. But again, this isn't done in isolation. All that stuff about stories I particularly like because I'm more of an introverted person. So I like to do things on my own, and I like to write about my story. I like to read and look at all that kind of stuff, but it requires fellowship. I think it kind of has to. And I came to know this in that Chippewa County jail again, of how stories can reinforce each other. I remember sitting there, and it was in a bunk style jail cell. So there's about 25 of us in one room with these bunk beds up and down. And I spent 90 days there. And the stories that I heard while I was there were stories that all people kind of promoted going back to the lifestyle that they had lived. A lot of conversations about, when I get out, I'm going to go get this amount of drugs, or when I get out, I'm going to go do this type of behavior. And I just thought, that was interesting. Then I come into recovery in AA, and I start telling my story. Other people share their story, and I feel some like churning inside of me about, well, I don't really like what that person said. I don't like how they handled that. Well, what's that going on inside of me that I'm so discontent with people around me? It kind of came to a head. I was 4 months sober my second time around, and it would have been 2013, and I'd been in these meetings on a 4-step workshop. When you go into the recovery program there, you go to one of these meetings once a week. So I've now spent about 10 minutes going to the same meeting where they talk about the 4-step all the time. Except they switch guys in between, and that's an important part of community, is that they're personal. Our stories are personal, and they touch people in different ways. Me sharing a story may affect some people a different way, whereas a friend of mine sharing a story would touch a person, even the same story, in a different way, simply because of the person communicating the story. And that's what I found with that person sharing the 4-step message. Some reason that day he shared a story about Bellevue, Minnesota, which is a town that's really close to mine where I grew up. And it changed something in my mind to where that night, when I was contemplating running away from the treatment center back to nothing, I didn't have anywhere to go. That was kind of the hard part. I didn't have anywhere to go, but I couldn't stand being around the people I was with. I couldn't stand myself, really. And so I wanted to run away, and it came to this breaking point where I took the suggestion of these people and did the 4-step inventory. And it was a spiritual experience. And you can go ahead and go to that next slide. And you can click it once more. A picture should come up. I had it as like an effect. There we go. So spiritual experience, change in perspective, is kind of the idea of the renewing of the mind. And so this process of understanding my story, sharing my story, the surrender and action, that paradox of life of how hard things produce good results sometimes, and how defeat turns into victory in community produces these spiritual experiences. And so I really like this poem. This was taken a while back, but I'll just read it out loud. So it says, if you read it from top to bottom, kind of the normal way you would read a poem like this, it says, today was the absolute worst day ever, and don't try and convince me that there's something good in every day. Because when you take a closer look, the world is a pretty evil place. Even if some goodness does shine through once in a while, satisfaction and happiness don't last. And it's not true that it's all in my mind and heart, because true happiness can be obtained only if one's understandings are good. It's not true that good exists. I'm sure you can agree that the reality creates my attitude. It's all beyond my control, and you'll never in a million years hear me say that today was a good day. Then at the bottom it says, now read this from bottom to top. And so it says, today was a good day. And you'll never in a million years hear me say that it's all beyond my control. My attitude creates the reality. I'm sure you can agree that it's not true that good exists only if one's surroundings are good. True happiness can be obtained because it's all in the mind and heart. And it's not true that satisfaction and happiness don't last. Some goodness does shine through once in a while, even if the world's a pretty evil place. Because when you take a closer look, there's something good in every day. And don't try to convince me that today was the absolute worst day ever. And so that was a helpful way of trying to see, I think it portrays this kind of paradox of life. And I've come to understand that as spirituality and recovery. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts?
I often think about being honest with yourself and what does that really mean?
Can you say that one more time? I couldn't quite hear you.
I often think about being honest with myself and what does that really mean? And sometimes interacting with other people, they might point something out. And maybe it's something I don't want to hear. So maybe I'm closed to it.
Yeah.
There may be truth to it.
Yeah.
And
Well,
and I think I was thinking about that while you were telling this your story about being in the jail. And at what point is the surrender versus the honesty sort of piece of it, I guess, is what I'm wondering about.
yeah. Well, I think you hit the nail on the head per se when you said, what did you say? You said
Being honest.
other people saying things can reveal a truth within you. And I think that's kind of the balance. And so surrender, whenever somebody says something, and this just happened last week to me, whenever somebody says something to me that triggers a defensive response, for me, that is like a awareness that I need to evaluate what's going on inside of me. Not saying that the other person's right, but I don't really appreciate that discontent inside. I need to figure out what is going, and that's where this inventory process has been really revealing to me. Because I'll sit down. The way I do inventory is a 2-page sheet of paper. People can do it journaling. But I sit down, and on the front side of the sheet of paper, I write the story I tell about the situation. I write out who am I mad at? What did they do? What do I think they have done to me? And what does that hurt in me? Does it hurt my finances, my personal, my sexual relations, my pocketbook, those type of ideas? And then on the back side of the sheet of paper, this is where it gets tricky, because as you alluded to, it's hard to at times be honest with myself. I think that's a thing I'm greatly afraid of, honestly. I've seen what lying to myself does. It has very bad consequences in my life. To engage that, so there's that element of kind of habitual surrender. You could call it humility, and like a biblical idea, fear of the Lord, in the wisdom literature, is kind of this reverence towards God and constantly seeking. But when I flip that sheet of paper over to the back side, that's where I ask God to show me. And I think that's a key point, because the way my mind works, I understand how that sheet's supposed to work. I understand when I ask myself how I've been selfish, dishonest, or self-seeking, that's the kind of topics on the back side of the sheet that I'm supposed to try and answer as to what caused the front side of the sheet. Does that make sense a little bit? But when it really changes is when I ask God to show me, and whatever comes out on that sheet, it doesn't often make sense. It's usually things that have nothing to do with the person on the front side of that sheet of paper. That's kind of the interesting thing. I started to find out it had to do with me not opening up my mail or dealing with probation that caused the tension or my dislike for my roommate. I couldn't be around people because I was leaving these things undealt with. And that's not even to say opening your mail is right, but I felt some type of way inside that was saying, I'm not being honest with myself. And I'm kind of always in this defensive state. And so, I start doing that work. And then I can remember countless times when I'm sitting in rooms and people would remind me, specifically around finances and my father. That's always been kind of a touchy subject in my story. And I would look at people and they would remind me of my dad with what they were saying, and sometimes in direct response to what I said. And that would really light a switch inside of me. And so I started to hear what they're saying, started to wrestle with why is this causing such a angst inside of me. And it just slowly, I think over time, I don't know how it happened. It's kind of I would say a miracle of how that's worked out. And, to be able to have a relationship with my father to a point, where it used to not be, and to where I didn't need to feel like I needed to run out of rooms, of AA rooms, of people that wanted to help me, because that's how it built up in my life, to where I'd push away anyone that wanted to help me. Does that answer the honesty part a little bit? No?
Wanted to tag team onto this. We're constantly constructing narratives about ourselves and other people. And we attach our identity to those narratives. And so part of the surrendering process, as you're describing, is deconstructing those narratives, because you can feel like a victim, or you can feel, this rage and carry that. And in the surrendering process, I think God can enter in and help construct another narrative. But we're people that are wired to construct narratives, and that gives us meaning. And so in this process of constructing and deconstructing, I think there's tremendous surrendering, and it's a challenge for everybody all the time. If we take offense at something someone's saying, then it's like, oh, wait a minute, you're like, that person's this and such, and it's like, wait a minute, maybe there's a different reality about that. So I think it's this notion of surrender is infinitely fascinating too, because especially for folks who got into addiction problems early on, I mean, there's some powerful narratives there coming from family or family relationships, and and I think that becomes really tough to deconstruct sometimes, because it's your formative years, and none of us were raised by normal parents, and none of us are normal parents. So if there is such a thing as a normal parent. So I don't know, I'm just kind of rambling on here, but narratives.
Well, and I think you highlighted kind of my whole journey, since the time of becoming sober, and then choosing to go into school for this kind of stuff, and to think about this whole idea. I think it's really hard. Yeah, I've often asked. I've seen people walk out of centers. I've seen people die. Almost more so in recovery than in addiction. When you're in recovery, it's when people leave and then they end up having a funeral. And you see people come and go, but that idea of surrender, and I've been just coming extremely fascinated with that biblical storyline of the creation fall narrative and comparative analogy of comparing stories, and it reveals this wisdom about the world, I think, comparing our own stories to each other's, and it's in a disarming way, I think, in a way different than if I just told you what to do or somebody told me what to do. Generally that wasn't received well. A story was a little bit different. So we can go to the next slide. I'll just read a couple prayers that have become regulars in my life, and they kind of encompass this idea of what I've been talking about. So this is his serenity prayer. It says, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace, taking as Jesus did this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that you will make all things right if I surrender to your will, so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever in the next. Amen. And then this last one, you can go to that last slide. This is called the set aside prayer. I used to have a sponsor in AA, and every time we would meet, he would say his opening prayer wasn't this whole prayer, but it was just, help me forget what I think I know. Just so we could learn from God. That was the goal. Like, get out of my own way so I can learn. And obviously, like, you can take this to a stream. I don't want to forget how to breathe necessarily, but remove the things that are harming me, and just to try and find truth. So I'll just read it. It's called the set aside prayer. God, please set aside everything I think I know about myself, everything I think I know about recovery, and everything I think I know about you. Please help me to have an open mind so I may have a new experience and discover the truth. So, yeah, any other questions, or if it's time to wrap up, we can.
I'd just like to say this applies to all of us, no matter what. No matter what. It's very helpful. It was one of the first things, the Serenity Fair, one of the first things that I came across was the bedside table of my grandmother. She was a saint just us. So I'm just thinking for myself, going back to a spiritual director, because I need assistance in doing what this last prayer suggests.
Yeah, it's interesting for me to Judy kind of kick that off, the idea that recovery from alcoholism or drugs can be, but what those can lead you to is so profoundly dysfunctional that you reach a point where maybe that's you have to recover, either that or you just go down the tubes. But the kind of recovery that comes from being raised from in some kind of a dysfunctional family is not necessarily going to cause you those same kinds of negative effects, other negative effects, but are they negative enough to make you realize that you need some kind of recovery from that? And I suppose that's really what therapy is all about, answering or addressing that question. But it simply makes that sense of recovery being a almost universal human thing, not something that, they were into drugs, or they were into alcohol, something like that, that we could all benefit from.
Yeah.
I agree, there's so many avenues to apply this way of thinking and looking at life. I think we're wrestling with it in our streets right now, in terms of what is our truth and what is really important to us. And what is our idea of truth and honesty? And there were a number of vigils all around our city last night. I went down the corner and ended up with 30 people from my neighborhood and met some people I had never met before after living 30 plus years in my neighborhood. But everybody wants to connect. Everybody wants to do something to keep our community. They value our community. And it's a really beautiful thing because we're all wrestling with, how do we do that? And how do we push whatever this horrible thing is away. And what are we responsible for in terms of making that horribleness? And I think we've been wrestling with this a lot since George Floyd was murdered. So maybe we have a little more experience with this than other places in our country, but it's very real, and this idea of being honest and truthful and can we let our guard down? Do we take those risks? What do we surrender to? Is really, really tricky right now. But I think that's from a Christian perspective, to love no matter what is a very, very strong calling. And I think there's a great truth to that.
Well, I'm Jennifer and I'm a grateful recovering alcoholic, and this is my first time at this church and this faith formation group. And well, that's an interesting situation. And but I will say that I continue to go to AA. I don't drink anymore. Been sober for a few years, and but I and many alcoholics continue to go to the program for emotional sobriety. They actually call it that. That's why I keep going back. No, I love that I was here today to be amongst others. Yeah.
You're welcome aboard.
Welcome.
Yes, Jan.
I said to Bill a day or so ago, maybe we finally get it. We are all God's children. And to watch on the Zoom where we heard from Buddhism, Muslim, Jewish, all stripes of Christian belief, non-believers, that we all have the same concerns. And we're recognizing our humanity and the importance of that. And recognizing God finding and finding that experience knowing God. So that it may be a great giant step forward for us in life.
I find myself concerned about and praying for the 3,000. You fill in the title. They're in these hotels for months. If they weren't radicalized before, I can't imagine it's helping. And the humanity that is lacking in the actions that we see. I hope that there's a flicker of their humanity staying with them or being created by the behavior of those of us trying to make a difference. And, I went to a presentation yesterday, just happened to, of all things, nurses who were in the Vietnam War. And these were people from the 60s crying publicly about their experiences then. And they had gone on to have happy, successful lives. This is doing none of us any good and a great deal of harm. And I think the children of these 3,000 people, as well as our own, we just need so many prayers.
Thought a lot about when Bishop Loyola was at our church. He was at church at the end of November. He talked about Desmond Tutu and his challenge against the leaders of apartheid, and his message was, don't you know that you've already lost? Join the winning side. And sometimes we don't know that we've lost. And I do feel same way that you feel, Linda, that there are people out here who are trying to destroy something that can never be destroyed. And you know, I walked away from my corner last night, you know, more committed. I mean, we heard that from Jared, you know, from his experience the last couple of days, you know. And that yearning for something, you know, greater and surrendering to something greater is very, very powerful.
Well, hope is an important word. We must have.
Undaunted
Yes,
in our love for each other.
including all who, yeah. Somehow surrender to violence. It's shocking. And maybe it's also, but that's me.
Okay.
Thank you very, very much for
Yeah.
sharing your journey with us today.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Is there a closing? Do you want me to do closing, or is everybody?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. I'll just pray with you all quick, and I think you all go into worship, and we'll enjoy that time. So, dear Lord, I just thank you for this time. I thank you for the participants, the journey that we're all on. And somehow by this day in 2026, via Zoom, for a number of factors, it's January 25th, we're get to meet together this way. And I thank you for that, despite the difficulties that we're experiencing in our world, in our nation, in our cities. Just yes, please help us to have that wisdom. God grant us the serenity. Amen.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.